Hello and welcome to the lesson on exam mastery for the OCR GCSE exam board. In this session, the idea is that we are going to look at the paper structure and the specifications, knowing exactly what occurs in each paper, how long they last for, all that sort of information you might need, different types of questions that occur and how to go about answering them, tips for revision and exam day sort of situations, as well as then sort of practice questions and walkthroughs. I'll give you a few example questions and a few example answers as well, just for you guys to be able to see, as well as some advice on what you should do when practicing these things at home. So the first paper is component 1, and this looks at the beliefs, teachings and practices for religion that you've chosen, Christianity and Islam, for example, because you will cover 2. That is going to depend based on which religions your school has chosen to study. There's no right or wrong combination of religions. It might be that you're doing Christianity and Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism. You could do any of the world religions. In this lesson, I'm going to use Christianity and Islam as my examples, purely because they are the most common religions to come up in sort of popularity. So that's why I'm going to focus on these ones today. But obviously you can just apply whatever I use in this lesson to religion that you're studying. Obviously the content might be different, but the idea and the practices behind what you need to do are going to remain the same. So during component 1, you're going to cover lots of different topics. So usually the belief about God that exists within that religion. So if it's Christianity, about God, Islam, Allah. If this was Hinduism, you might look at Brahman and the Trimurti. Or in Buddhism, the lack of God, and you're talking about the nature of the Buddha. Maybe that might be something instead. Finally, there'll be a theme of life after death, how we go about going from one life into the next, what allows us to enter those places. Then obviously we also need to look at things like the practices, things like the different ways they worship or the different actions they do as a particular ritual in their religion, as well as then the festivals that they will celebrate as well. We will have 3 3-mark questions, a 6-mark question and a 15-mark question per religion. Okay, so that's why you have to make sure that you are ready to answer that paper in the best way possible. It is quite a lot to ask for. When you look at the 3-mark questions and what you have to do for each of them, you can see that actually they're questions that you can get done quite quickly. So component 2 then, so this is for paper 2, this is where you can see your religion, your philosophy and ethics start to come through. Now this is actually a 2-hour paper, because rather than talking about 2 religions, teachings and practices, this bit here you're going to have 4 main themes, 4 main sorts of topics that you're going to cover. That is relationship and families, the existence of God, religion, peace and conflict, and dialogue between religious and non-religious views. Now, if you wanted to go and find some lessons on these, are lessons on this in the themes part of the classroom. So if you go onto the RS page, go onto the themes, you'll see those there. Dialogue between religious and non-religious views isn't something I've made a lesson on yet. I will be doing so soon. However, what you can do is there are going to be moments where in the existence for God, for example, where we will start to have that dialogue between religious and non-religious views. Go through, have a look at those lessons. If you can pick anything extra up for the religious and non-religious views, then that's great. If you're watching this after the lesson on dialogue between religious and non-religious views has been made, and enjoy that lesson as well. All of this is going to be examined through religious and ethical perspectives. So it's really important to not only understand what these themes actually include, but also what then those religious believers think about those particular topics and how they're going to engage with sources of authority to form their beliefs. What we're going to do now is have a quick look at some of the different exam questions that are going to occur within the exam papers. Now, the exam question types remain the same across both component 1 and component 2. The difference is how many questions you have to answer. So rather than writing 2 loads per religion, writing 4 loads per theme. So the first 3-mark question is a give 3 ways question. Now, what you have to do here is 3 really simple bullet points. Now, in some cases, this can be singular words where appropriate. Now, this isn't always going to be appropriate. You might need to write a little bit more just to give some context. However, you can get away with, in some instances, using singular words as your answer. This question then should take you quite a short period of time, maybe only a minute, if you're not having to write in full sentences at all. But if you really want to push yourself and give yourself as much time in those 15-mark questions, you want to make sure that you're trying to aim for around 30 seconds, 10 seconds to write a word. That should be enough time. However, This is a challenge, okay? And I know that this is a challenge, and that's why I'm setting it, because if you can get your 3-mark questions down to that period of time, you're going to be well on your way to saving yourself as much time so you can really sort of add that development to those 15-mark questions. Now, the second 3-mark question is an outline question. Usually outline what some religious people might believe about a particular topic. Now, the structure for this is slightly different again. It requires you to write in full sentences, but they do not have to be developed. You can literally just give 3 things, but in full sentences this time. You just need to give 3 basic beliefs. It doesn't have to be anything complicated at all. Really good way of doing this is using definitions. Using definitions are key. So say, for example, a question asks you to outline what they might believe about God's omnipotence. And you could say, is all-powerful, allowed to make creation, and was able to put himself into 3 separate forms. You could just highlight those 3 really simple sentences, and that would get you the marks for that question. Now, the final 3rd mark question is a describe question. The structure of this is you do need to write in full sentences again, and this does require a little bit of development. However, the amount of development is often misunderstood because there are ways of doing this, keeping this in a very simple state. An example would be describe what Christians mean when they say God is eternal. So what you're going to want to do here is have an answer something like this. Now, I have given 2 sentences because what I have done is I've given 1 point and I have developed it, and I have given a secondary point. So here are my 2 points. God has always existed and God is everlasting. And yes, they do count as 2 separate answers, even though it feels like they're saying the same thing. And then here we see the development of that point, that therefore will always exist, although has already done so, will continue to do so in the future. This therefore means they describe him as everlasting. This idea that it all wraps up into one really neat answer. You can see how those 3 individual things allow you to get those 3 marks. Now, coming on to these 6-mark questions then, this is where there's a little bit more criteria involved. This is still going to be a described question. It's going to be marked based on bands, and this particular band 3 is the highest level answer you can provide in this particular question. And what I thought might be useful to do is just talk through some of the different criteria, things you need to do, things you need to achieve within your answer. So you need to be able to show a good understanding of the question by using appropriate selection of religious knowledge. Now, this could be referencing particular religious stories, using key terms, things like that in your answer is going to help you get into that band 3. So rather than saying that God is all-powerful, say that God is omnipotent. Rather than saying there are 3 main gods in Hinduism, call them the Trimurti. Whatever it might be, use that key knowledge that shows you have a good understanding of the religion that you are studying. Obviously, you need to make sure you use appropriate sources of wisdom and authority with detail and develop description. So just giving a quotation isn't enough. You need to reference where that quotation has come from and then go on and say what it means. So it's all well and good just throwing in a quotation at the end thinking that's going to get you the marks. But if you do not develop that quotation and explain what it means, you're not going to get into that band 3 answer. So those marks for the appropriate use of sources of wisdom or authority are not going to be granted. Good knowledge and understanding of different viewpoints. Now, this one here comes from within Christianity. That's because I've taken this from a mark scheme from a Christian paper. Being able to identify the fact that within the religion there might be different beliefs about a particular idea. So, for example, in Christianity, Catholics might believe something slightly different to Protestants. Shia Muslims might believe something slightly different to Sunni Muslims. Some Hindus, like Levites, are going to believe something different from the Vaishyas. They're going to believe these different sorts of ideas and therefore are not going to always have the same answer. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for your understanding of the religion and the diversity of their views. You need to be able to have a good knowledge and understanding of the influence on individuals. Now, sometimes a 6-mark question can have an idea of influence in there. But you have to be able to say how a particular belief about something impacts their behaviours, impacts their actions. If you don't do so, again, you're going to struggle to get into that band 3 answer, as well as then showing a clear understanding of breadth and depth of the issue. So not just giving a foundational understanding, but showing your knowledge goes deeper than just the surface. So rather than saying Jesus got crucified on Good Friday, saying that he got crucified for the salvation of the world, for the taking on everybody's sin, the removal of original sin, all of these ideas are things that you would want to use to sort of show that you've got breadth or depth of a particular belief. Finally, then, we get onto these 15-mark questions. Now, if you've been watching any of the other videos and any of the other platforms, you will have seen me talk a lot about 12 and 15-mark questions. Structures for this is usually you have to evaluate a statement, usually with religious views. Now, this can be different in the component 2, which we will talk about in just a minute. It requires you to look at an idea, look at a belief, and show what are the strengths of this belief, what's a counter argument. The structure is you're going to want to have some level of introduction. Now, this isn't required by specification. However, it's a really useful tool just to highlight that you understand exactly what the question is asking you, and just allowing the examiner to know exactly where you're going to take it. Part of the mark scheme shows you need to be having a logical chain of reasoning. And if you highlight what your arguments are going to be before you get into it, it helps the examiner look at your answer and go, yeah, okay, I can see how they got to that point. You're going to want to have two different views, as I said, usually with teachings and quotations. So you're going to have one side of the argument being arguing for the statement, one side of the argument disagreeing with the statement, usually proposing some other counter idea. Now, it's really important that you do that because under different exam boards, for example, I know that they can, in some cases, only give you half marks if you do not give a secondary alternative, if you only show the downside of the initial argument, because what that's really doing is more showing evaluation rather than a development with a second view. So making sure that you'd have two very different views. So again, for Christianity, if the question was adult baptism is the most important practice, you might want to counter that with infant baptism being the most important practice, or Holy Communion being the most important practice. Those sorts of ideas, rather than just saying, here's an idea, this is why it's wrong. You want to make sure that you're using two separate views. And then you're going to want to come to some sort of personal conclusion, weighing up two sides of the argument, saying, overall, this one is the most convincing. Now, this does not have to be your actual personal opinion. A lot of the time, people can get too worked up on trying to figure out what to write for their conclusion because they kind of agree on both sides and they don't really feel as if there's one that is stronger than the other. If that is a situation you find yourself in, what you are going to do is just pick a side. The examiners do not care what your opinion is. They just want to see that you have answered the question. They are not going to be bothered by the fact that you have suggested that the crucifixion is more important than the resurrection, or the resurrection is more important than the crucifixion. It doesn't matter what the view is necessarily. There might be one or two questions where this is going to be a little bit more obvious as to which way is the right side, but you're already going to know that anyway. So, for example, if a question came up saying an Islam paper that Muhammad is the most important prophet, no one's really going to agree otherwise. So, in situations like that, you should already be aware of which sides are going to be the correct sides of the argument. So in a question like that, for example, you would know to argue with the side of Prophet Muhammad. Now, a really important tip, make sure you include all of the red keywords that you have seen sort of throughout the lesson so far and what you will see in the upcoming few slides. Whenever you see the red keywords in any of the lessons that you watch or this platform or throughout the rest of this lesson, if you use those keywords, that's going to be really, really good for you. That's because some of these questions can sometimes have spelling, punctuation, and grammar marks available. If you use those keywords, you're going to score higher in SPAG rating, which allows you to sort of get extra marks for free just by using key terminology. Now, the use of quotations is crucial here, especially if you can give development and link them to your point. So if you use a PEAL format, point, evidence, explain, link, if you use that throughout each argument, when you're going to want about 2 to 3 sort of points per side of the argument, you are going to land yourself in a really strong position to get those full 15 marks, especially if you use that personal conclusion. If you do not include a personal conclusion, the most marks you could receive would be a band 3 answer rather than getting those full 15 marks. So make sure that you are really making sure that you've got that conclusion in there, even if it is not your opinion. Now, The component two, what I thought I'd do very, very quickly is go through just a very brief overview of what key topics occur in each of the themes, just so you have an understanding of what exactly it is that you need to be revising for this exam. You're going to want to be looking at things like the roles of men and women, looking at how they interact in terms of the family, in terms of society, as well as then what their jobs become as they become parents. You need to be able to understand the sexual relationships between them and what the views are on those sexual relationships. Things like sex before marriage. Is it acceptable? Is it not? The use of contraception. Those sorts of ideas are what you're going to want to bring forward here. Obviously, you're going to want to speak about the ideas of marriage and divorce. What does marriage mean to the particular religion? Is it something that is a fundamental belief that cannot be broken and therefore divorce would be wrong? Or does the religion accept divorce? That's the sorts of things, you're going to be unpacking in this topic. You'll be looking at family life, jobs of the different family members, including those of children, as well as then looking at gender equality, understanding that there is equality in society within the family unit. Is it a case of men and women are treated equally? In terms of the existence of God, then, you cover things like design argument, looking at this idea that everything that is complex shows evidence of design. The universe is complex and therefore must have been designed. This argument from William Paley really sort of pushes forward this argument for God's existence. You could also link it to Thomas Aquinas' cosmological argument, this idea of the first cause argument, that everything must have a cause, therefore the universe must have a cause, therefore God must have caused the universe. Also have a look at miracles and the validation of miracles. Religious experiences and things like that are crucial for many people to forming a religious belief. A huge part of their evidence for the suggestion that God exists, as well as then the ideas of revelation, this idea that particular moments of prophecies were delivered to people, which then lived on through religious text, as well as then this idea of enlightenment going forward as well. In peace and conflicts, then, some of the things that you will cover are ideas such as violent protest and terrorism. Now, usually, most religious groups will argue this to be flawed, and you would want to counter any points made on this, usually with something peaceful like pacifism. You do look at the reasons for war and why some religious groups may justify war in particular cases. Specifically, Christians, they would use things like the just war theory, for example. This idea that there are set criteria that would allow you to cause violence and potentially even death in situations that are necessary. However, it has to be proportional to what is going against you at the same time. As I said earlier, you're going to want to use these ideas of pacifism, usually to counter-argue the concepts of violent protest and terrorism. Do look at examples of holy war. So there's lots of different examples depending on the religions that you're looking at. So you could look at the conflicts between Christians and Muslims in terms of the Crusades. You could talk about the conflicts between the Hindus and the Buddhists, which then led to the evolution of the Sikhs. You could talk about any of the Sikhs and the gurus fought to defend freedom of people and the safety of people. There's lots of different examples of holy war that you could use in this particular component. But most importantly then, especially in a time like this, you would argue that forgiveness and reconciliation is one of the most crucial parts that you will learn in this topic. This idea of forgiving others when they do something against you and reconciling that relationship, fixing that relationship between two individuals, between communities, or between yourselves and God. Now, these ideas then, again, you will see these red keywords, the just war theory. If you could use that in an answer, that's going to get you recognition. The terms reconciliation, again, is going to help you in a 15-mark question. Finally, then, looking at the dialogue between beliefs, things you will cover in this will be things like religion and secularism. So the idea of how does religion live within a secular society? Secularism being this idea of non-religious views. Get to look at the concepts between religion and science. Can they go hand in hand? Do they go against each other? The importance of freedom of religious expression and how impacted people are and on their availability to express their own religious views. For example, in Islam, you could reference the fact that in France, the use of the burqa has become illegal. You could talk about the fact that in workplaces in the UK, they've started banning religious dress out of fear of segregation. as well as then looking at interfaith dialogue. Are there possibilities that different religions and different organizations are actually agreeing on many ideas, and can their beliefs go hand in hand? As well as then looking finally at the ideas of conversion and mission, this idea of converting to other religions, converting other people to your religion, as well as then going out to other places to spread that message through good deeds as well. Now, the reason I spoke about the idea of this particular exam paper for component 2 being slightly harder is because you have got a lot to do. Now, this leads me for the tips for revision when it comes to breaking down exactly what it is that you're going to need to be successful. Now, the first bit of advice I would have is focus on those keywords and those quotations. Like I said to you earlier, any words that you see in my lessons that come up in red are keywords that you're going to want to implement into your exam questions. Now, an easy way to remember these is through the use of flashcards. Now, when I was revising for my exams, what I used to do is stick my flashcards to different things that I would aim to use. For example, the TV remote. Now, I would not be able to use that TV remote until I had answered the flashcard correctly. So if it was a keyword, I would have to give the definition. If it was a quotation, I would have to fill in the blanks or say which religious text it came from. These sorts of ideas were really useful for me, and it meant that I was constantly engaging with the information, but in really small chunks. You don't want to overload your brain with too much at once. Now, another thing that you can do is use past paper questions. Now, I would really recommend that you do go online, find past papers that you can find questions for one of two reasons. One, you can see what questions have come up recently. That way you can try to focus on maybe some of the things that haven't come up. But what you can also do is practice looking at the mark schemes as well as timing your questions. One thing that a lot of people do wrong when it comes to writing out exam questions is they don't put themselves in timed conditions. In order to know exactly how much you need to improve your writing, you're not going to know that without timing it. If you cannot fit within the timescale needed for the exam, you're going to really struggle. So that's something that you can practice by using simple sentence starters, for example. Final thoughts for this session then, just to make sure that we are all happy. Now, OCR GCSE is all about understanding the beliefs of a particular religion and applying it clearly, whether that be applying it to the practices part of component 1 or applying their beliefs into component 2. You need to make sure you are applying it clearly and making sure you are specific about which religion and what it is exactly that they believe. Make sure that you learn keywords, use the structures that I have shown you throughout this lesson for component 1 and component 2, and back up your answers with teachings. Always make sure that you have referenced some sort of teaching because you will not get the developed marks without it. I hope this has been helpful for those of you doing the OCR exams. If you do want anything else, please do feel free to drop me a message or put a post out on the community page, and I will have a look at starting to make those lessons for you. Thank you very much, guys, and I will see you in the next one.